Becoming comfortable and quick with the trial and error method for factoring trinomials requires that you practice the method quite a bit. You'll do that in homework, but let's start with some practice in the lecture notes. So here are 4 examples of trinomials. Go ahead and try the trial and error method or the guess and check method. Practice these. You can pause the video, do the problems, then unpause and see the results. All right, so let's look at the answers here. Remember, a trinomial is going to factor into the product of 2 binomials. The first term is going to factor into the first positions, so there's only one way to factor 2. You can factor it to 1 and 2. So I'm going to use 1x and 2x, or I could say 2x and x. You can write them in any order you want. The 15 is going to split into the last position. Now there's 2 ways to factor 15, 1 and 15, 3 and 5. You can try any combination of those. Remember to switch the orders around. But one of the things that can be helpful is to think about how these 2 numbers, whether it's the 1, the 15, and 3, and the 5, would multiply by the 2. And think about how we might get close to the middle term of 13. If I multiply the 2 by the 5, so by putting the 5 over here, I get a 10x, which is very close to that 13. So so we move the 3 here to make the 15, and 3x plus 10x does give me what I want. There's the 13x. So if that hadn't worked, I would have maybe tried the other order with the 3 and the 5, or tried the 1 and the 15. But the 3 and the 5 worked in that order, but let's finish checking by doing a thorough check. I'm going to erase my first minor check. Checking fully, we FOIL out 2x squared plus 10x for the outside plus 3x for the inside plus 15. There's the first term we started with, there's the last term, and then the 2 in the middle do add up to a positive 13x. Remember to always check your signs carefully. In this case, we have exactly what we started with. Continuing to the second problem, after getting that first answer, we have 3y squared minus 25y plus 28. So again, set up your parentheses for your binomials. It's only one way to factor 3y squared, that's 3y and y. There are multiple ways to factor the 28, 1, 28, 2, 14, 4, 7. The thing to remember is if we look carefully, there's a negative 25 as a middle term. The only way to get numbers to add up to a negative is to at least have one negative. Well, to get a positive 28, we can't just have one negative. We need to be multiplying 2 negatives together. If we only used one negative here, we would get a negative 28. So we need to use pairs of negatives. So that means that we're going to be using negatives in both places. Now, looking at these numbers and recognizing we're going to multiply 3 by something, the closest we could get to maybe that 25 would be by using the negative 7 to multiply the 3. Now this may or may not work, but it's certainly a good first check. So if I put the negative 7 there, I have to pair it up with the 4. So the outside multiplication is negative 21y, the inside is negative 4y, and we get lucky. That does add up to the middle term, which is what I wanted. Again, do a thorough, complete check by foiling completely. So we had a minor check there that looked good. Let's check it all the way. 3y squared for the first terms, minus 21y for the outside, minus 4y for the inside, and positive, remember watch your signs, 2 negatives make a positive, 28. So far the first term and the last term work. We add up the middle, we get that negative 25y, which is exactly what we have. That checks, so this is our final factorization. 3y minus 4 times y minus 7. Continuing on, here's our next example, 6x squared minus 13xy minus 5y squared. What we have here is 2 variables in the problem. The x squared in the first term, the x squared always splits to x and x, and the y squared will split to y and y in the second location. This is very typical if you have both 2 variables in your trinomial. Now we need to figure out how to factor the 6 and the negative 5. So we could write some examples here. 6 will have 2 ways it can factor, 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Negative 5 really just one way, the 5 and the 1. Because 5 is negative, we're going to need one of them to have a negative sign to multiply to a negative. I'm just going to start with the smaller numbers just because it's easier for multiplication. If 2 and 3 don't work out, I'll go back and try the 1 and the 6 with the x's. Then I'm going to plug in the minus 1 and the positive 5. Now, a little reminder, a negative 1y is the same thing as just having negative y. So there's no reason to have the 1 there, but I wouldn't necessarily mark you wrong if you wrote it. All right, so if we check these, the outside terms would give us positive 10xy, which looks semi-good, and then a negative 3xy for the middle. Now, if you were ignoring signs, that might look good, but remember, we've got one positive, one negative. That adds up to positive 7xy. Don't be fooled into thinking that's going to give you a negative 13, which is what we're after. It actually gives us a positive 7xy. So that's not giving us what we want. Now, we shouldn't just abandon the 1 and the 5. What we should do is look at switching the order. So that didn't work. So let's try this again, but with the opposite order. So instead of having the positive 5 on the right side, let's have it on the left. So let's put a positive 5y here. That would mean the negative 1y would be on the right. Now let's try this again. The outside is negative 2xy. The inside would be positive 15xy. That is a good start because we've got the right number. 15 minus 2 is 13. But it's the wrong sign. It's a positive 13xy. We want a negative. Luckily, the only thing we have to do to make that give us the right sign is to change the sign that we currently have. Let's make this a negative 5 and this a positive 1. Simply by changing signs, we're going to switch this around, so this is now going to be a negative 15 and a positive 2xy. So now we have a negative 15xy in the inside, factor is multiplication, and on the outside we get a positive, and so that makes our sum be negative 13xy. So there's what we wanted. We can finish that off with a thorough check to make sure we didn't miss anything. Just FOIL out the entire thing. All right. I'm sure you have a better eraser than I have. 2x times 3x would be 6x squared. Outside terms would be positive 2xy. Inside terms would be negative 15xy. And last terms, negative times a positive would be negative 5y squared. First term is what we started with, last term is what we started with, and in the middle, careful with the signs, that is a negative 13xy. That's exactly what we started, so that checks. Last example here. 10y squared minus 11y minus 6. Once again, start with your factors that are binomials by putting the parentheses in. We know we have a y in the first position. We just need to think about how to use the factors of 10. We could use 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. I'm going to start with the 2 and 5. If that doesn't work, we'll go to the 1 and the 10. Then with negative 6, there's also two options. We could use negative 1 and 6, or we could use negative 2 and 3. I'm going to just put the negative 2 and the positive 3 in this direction and see what happens. 2y times 3 is 6y, and on the inside I'd get a negative 10y. That's going to add to negative 4y, which is not what I want. I want a negative 11. So that order didn't work. I could switch to different numbers, but since I'm using the 3 and the 2, let's go ahead and finish trying them out by just switching the order. So I'll put the positive 3 here on the left side with the 2y, and I'll put the negative 2 on the right side with the 5y. This is going to give us a different inside and outside calculation. The inside calculation will be 15y. The outside calculation will be negative 4y. And that's looking better because that gives us a positive 11y when we add it up. Now, we don't want a positive 11y. We want a negative 11y. The fix to just having a sign mistake is just to change the signs you currently have. So this is going to be a negative 3 and a positive 2. So we just switch the signs around. So if you have the right number but the wrong sign, just switch the signs. So this looks like it was going to work, but we'll do a thorough check by foiling the entire thing out. So let's take a look. I'll make that y look a little better there. Multiplying from the beginning, 2y times 5y is 10y squared. Outside multiplication would be positive 4y. Inside multiplication would be negative 15y. And the last multiplication would be negative 6. First term works, last term works. Always double check your signs. And then adding the two middle terms, we get negative 11y, which is exactly what we wanted in the middle. So there's all 4 factorizations for these problems.